Hey everyone. So often I don't listen to God or do what He says because I don't think it really matters. When I've done something wrong, I might hear a little voice that says, that wasn't right. You should apologize for that. And then I have a choice whether to listen to it or not. So I might ignore it or I might justify what I did. If I choose to justify, I've got a million excuses. Um, I say, I'm just tired. They shouldn't have done that. It'll be okay. They didn't even notice. They'll forgive me anyway. I'll do it later. Oh, hang on. I just checked my phone. Yeah, you know what I mean. So often I don't do what God says because it seems so small. What He's asking me to do is a bit awkward and uncomfortable. And what does it matter if I do it anyway? But small things matter to God. Sometime in about 2007, well, definitely was 2007, I read a quote about character. Now, I know it was 2007 because the All Blacks had crashed out of the World Cup again, and this time they didn't even make the semi-final. Do you remember the pain? Do you remember what it felt like to knowing that we had the best team in the world, but they hadn't won a World Cup since 1987? Yeah, I remember it. So I read this article, and in the article, the writer said that I guess we could call our defeat character building. But how much character do you really need anyway? Now, that's a question that stuck with me because I don't like losing. I don't like it when the All Blacks lose. But also, I think it's a really good question. And I think that God's answer to that question, how much character do we really need? His answer would be a lot. To God, character is everything. It's through changing our character that He's changing the world. After the Christchurch terrorist attack in March last year, I remember asking the question, how do we combat that much hate? The attacks caused so much pain that I struggled to see how anything I could do would help. But I've come to the conclusion that the way we combat that much hate is through listening to God and doing what He says. God's love is big enough to combat the hate in this world. And He already has a plan. All we need to do is learn to listen to Him and do what He says. I don't believe that God's plan to change the world is to get a few people to do some really big things. I think His plan is to get a whole lot of people to do a whole lot of little things. Also, it's through listening to God in the small things that we learn to recognize His voice. And that way, our everyday life becomes our training ground. If we listen to God and we keep listening to Him in the small things and doing what He says, what was once awkward and difficult becomes a reflex. God uses small things to train us for bigger things. Like David, who knew how to fight Goliath because he'd spent a lot of time protecting his father's sheep. Or the Karate Kid, who knew how to fight because he'd spent a lot of time waxing the car and painting the fence. I've been thinking a lot over the past week or two about how God's plan is bigger than me and my life. I believe He cares deeply about me, but He doesn't only care about me. He cares about everyone. He cares about the world. If we look at our current situation, our government has imposed limits on our freedoms because our actions have the potential to cause harm to ourselves and to others in ways that we may not know or fully understand. That's exactly the same reason that God imposes limits on us. Our actions, even the small ones, affect others. And the awesome thing is that it's not just the bad actions, our bad things that we do that affect others. It's the good things too. Learning to listen to God and do what He says means that we can be part of God's plan to transform the world through His love. Now, I really want to be part of that. So I try to think about that whenever I think that it doesn't really matter.